I have been asked to talk about economic, social and cultural impact, and I thought this is a wide brief, but it's really quite a challenging one. And I thought maybe we should start with the definition of impact. I'm not using the REF definition. I think the easiest one is that impact, or research impact, is, in its simplest definition, the positive effect academic research has on the world beyond academia. And the emphasis is on beyond academia. The public discourse around such benefits, such as there is a public discourse, tends to foreground economic impact. So inventions, intellectual property, spin-off companies, and there is some assumption that most of this is associated with STEM. But that is to overlook a vast array of other types of impact. And in fact, research funders do recognise a much broader range of impacts, including, for instance, societal and cultural benefits, from understanding how people respond to a pandemic to perhaps increasing public awareness of Black history in Wales. So I should have started by asking whether you can all hear me, because I've now got a little way in, and I'm assuming you can. Nobody's alerted me otherwise. Okay. When I was asked to give this talk, I checked with Martin, and my brief was to avoid reducing impact to REF or to funding, and to engage more generally with the topic. And in a sense, to advocate for the importance of impact, which actually I found a really hard brief, not least because when I first started thinking about it, the value of impact to me seemed self-evident. Why would you not want your research to have a life beyond academia, to change in some small way Wales and the world? But I thought that would be quite a short talk. The argument, of course, is also much more complicated than that. At the other extreme, why would an early career researcher want to spend the considerable time required on achieving impact when you have so much work to do already to produce excellent research and to make a name for yourself in your discipline and amongst your peers? I'm going to take these off because I just realised I don't actually need to listen at this particular moment. I think there has to be room in universities for both of those two positions and everything in between. And before I go on to talk in a little bit more detail about impact, then I wanted to address the elephant in the room, and that is the danger in the process of advocating for impact, the danger of instrumentalizing university research. There's a spending review being conducted as we speak, and it reports at the end of this month. And UK research funding has to be justified as part of that review. Showing how research can address urgent challenges where research is likely to have an immediate impact is an attractive way of justifying ourselves to the government, but that has to be balanced with the fundamental need for what's being called discovery research. It's blue sky, curiosity-driven, pure, basic research. These are all sort of STEM terms, but I think in the humanities we can also understand them, how that applies to our fields. So in supporting impact as a desirable outcome for individual researchers, as well as civic society as a whole, I also firmly believe that potential impact cannot be the first or the only basis for research. And I thought it's also worth acknowledging at the outset this tension between discovery research and applied or challenge-focused research isn't just about UKRI or UK government tensions. It exists in individual disciplines and departments and in personal career choices. And since impact has moved up the research agenda in REF terms and across many funding streams, actually spending your valuable time on impact may not be as controversial as it once was. Although the distinction between pure and applied science and the relative prestige, which is primarily determined by peer review, still exists, or so I'm told by my colleagues and friends in science. And I think in part that distinction could also be exacerbated by generational differences, a problem that may diminish as researchers who value impact more move up through the hierarchy. So that's a sort of a context, I suppose. But there are what I wanted to do was to spend a little bit of time thinking about the diverse ways in which impact can arise from research. So from problem-solving projects on the one hand to the unexpected and often considerably delayed impact from discovery research done years before, and from the accumulated expertise that a single, maybe sort of garnered in a research group or in a single career. And I think there's also a third way, if you like, in which we can see a model in which a porosity between university and external partners and communities could be seen as generating both knowledge exchange, sort of the outward facing, explaining your research to the wider world, but ideally also a measure of co-created research so that this becomes a two-way exchange. So, I mean, I was thinking about examples of this problem-solving approach where perhaps the impact is greater than the prestige of the pure science behind it or the pure research behind it. And Swansea's seagrass project sprung to mind. Seagrass, as you probably know, or you may have heard, it absorbs a lot of CO2. And so this project was looking at establishing a methodology to establish large-scale seagrass beds. It's applied research that has attracted global attention, and it's had a big impact on a community level too, where adults and children have been involved in creating a test bed in Pembrokeshire, and loads of people have been involved. So you could think about the way that impact is measured in well-being, in providing opportunities to practically address the climate anxiety that's been felt, especially by younger people. I mean, my son's class in primary school sort of ended up in tears watching David Attenborough the other day. It's, what can we do? This has been a practical example of positive action. But, in bringing all these different people together, different generations and communities together, it's a practical endeavour. In a practical endeavour, it can lead to all sorts of unexpected networks. And if you are going to triangulate the evidence of impact, we could look at the economic impact of scaling up that project, in terms of the industry it creates. And of course, it will ultimately reduce the volume of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's genuinely life-changing stuff. But the research behind it is not necessarily going to be peer-reviewed as kind of cutting edge in terms of pure disciplines, pure research. But so that's an example of kind of challenge-based research and impact. But as I said, I still believe that universities and funders have to value discovery research for its own sake. Impact may or may not follow. And as I said at the beginning, I don't think that impact has to be part of all research, that it's part of a wider ecology of research in the university, if you like. I was trying to think of a good example of some either impact appearing after a long period, or some excellent research which has never had a practical application. So via Facebook, I asked for some examples, and Higgs boson was one of the ones that came back. It's the theory from the 60s. The particle was finally identified in 2012 in the Large Hadron Collider. And recently, this work was described by Todd Adams, who's a professor of physics, as fundamental research at its most basic, meaning pure search for knowledge. And yet, I mean, that work has had a huge impact. It's been covered in the media. It's been the subject of numerous documentaries. So this pure science has expanded public awareness. And if you wanted to sort of drill down to a granular level, it's provided material for production teams, for broadcasters. So there are cultural and economic dimensions to that impact too. And I think one of the challenges of sort of learning to find your way around impact is to be able to identify these different types of impact and the way that we might sort of measure them and quantify them, because I suppose we may take some types of impact for granted and not realize that they're important. outcome of our research. So knowledge for its own sake can generate impact when we remember that changing public awareness or introducing new knowledge is impact. And that brings me to my final kind of model or example of research and impact, where discovery-driven research is impactful. I think this works particularly well in a Welsh context, where arguably the relationship between government and universities, or at least policymakers and academics, is closer and perhaps more constructive than at a UK level. And my final example comes from arts and humanities in Wales, and arts and humanities focused on Wales, where there is a long-standing, it's a broad commitment to impact. But nevertheless, the underpinning research is best described as discovery or curiosity-driven research. And so my example is from very close to home, as Louise mentioned in my introduction. I'm a co-director of CREW now, which is a research centre that was originally founded by Emwyn Thomas about 30 odd years ago to study the English literature and language of Wales. And CREW was committed to impact before the term was coined in this sort of research funding context. And it continues to work very closely with civic organisations and policymakers, including Arts Council of Wales, Books Council of Wales, Literature Wales, and also with Welsh Government departments. And Thomas's decades of discovery research into the diversity of the two literatures of Wales, in English primarily, but also in Welsh, meant that when in 2003, the Welsh Assembly's Culture Committee decided to conduct a policy review into Welsh writing in English, he was able to give extensive and convincing evidence that led to a significant policy shift, with increased funding for publishing and also a generously funded new flagship series of classics called The Library of Wales, which in turn gave Welsh writing in English an internationally recognised brand. And in turn, that commitment to Welsh writing in English has found its way to the school syllabus and to the new Welsh curriculum, which comes in 2022, ensuring that we won't find a new generation of students growing up in Wales without any contact with their national literature, which was the case before. So there is impact then also on the pipeline of future researchers and future citizens. I think perhaps investing energies beyond academia may feel more urgent in a Welsh context and in the context of Wales studies, as you know, the nation is developing its own sense of research priorities, and also it has retained its commitment to knowledge or education for its own sake, as Kirsti Williams recently reiterated in an article in The Guardian. There is another elephant in the room, and that is the attitude within Welsh universities to Wales-facing research, but I don't have time to talk about that one. Maybe we can pick that up later. So just to finish, I'm emphasising really that the porosity between university research and policymakers, research users, whether they're NGOs or culture and heritage, not to mention local communities, that porosity can be a really energising and rewarding environment in which to conduct research. And as we'll no doubt hear about in the next presentation, it can lead to the co-creation of research, which refreshes the kinds of questions we ask ourselves. But, and this is a relevant point in the ECR context of today, another potential benefit of this porosity within this really challenging career landscape that we face. Postdoctoral roles in some of these cognate organisations can actually provide a good stepping stone into or back into academic research posts. As I explained in my breakout room, that was actually my ECR career path. So impact invites us to see research in a wider frame than the peer-reviewed journal or peer-reviewed monograph. But that doesn't mean sacrificing discovery research. Rather, we need to find the structures which allow us to achieve both. Thank you.